I am here with the legendary Dr. Daniel Amen. We're going to talk about some lifestyle habits that are destroying your brain. Let's just jump right into it. What is number one on your list?
Not caring about your brain. I mean, just like not having a thought about the thing that thinks. I was 37 and I'm a double board certified psychiatrist then. I was the top neuroscience student in medical school, and I didn't care about my own brain. I was not sleeping, under chronic stress, eating bad food, drinking diet soda like it was my best friend. And I just never thought about it until I looked at my brain. That's what we do here at Amen Clinics, is you came to see me because you're anxious, because you're depressed, because you have OCD, because you're fighting with your wife. We'd look at your brain. And so when I looked at my brain for the first time and it wasn't healthy, I was horrified. My 60-year-old mother had a better looking brain than I did. And so I developed this concept, I wanted her brain, of brain envy. And when you care about it, when you love it, everything changes. Everything changes in your life. Like, I live in Newport Beach, California, where we have more plastic surgeons than almost anywhere in the world. And I often say we care more about our faces, our boobs, our bellies, and our butts than we do our brains. And that's insane. So that's the first thing. It's just not even being aware that it runs everything you do.
After today's video, check out Seed. Now, if you're looking at your metabolic health, one of the things that people don't look at is their gut. Okay, our gut diversity, our microbiome, plays a tremendous role in glucose modulation and plays a tremendous role in how our brain functions as well. Like, this is not just a talking head on YouTube saying this. There are countless bodies of microbiome research that are backing this up now, and Seed is at the forefront of a lot of microbiome research. So that link down below saves you 15% off Seed's Daily Synbiotic with a capsule inside of a capsule. If you know me well, then you know that I'm not a big supplement guy. Like, seriously, name 5 supplements that I talk about on this channel. I talk about magnesium, I talk about protein powder, I talk about creatine. I really don't condone a lot of supplements, but I think for certain people, probiotics might just be the leg up they need to help their microbiome. So that link's down below in the description. You know, it took me until having some serious call to actions myself to realize that I need to be prioritizing my brain. For me, it wasn't just not paying attention to it anymore. I put that first. You know, people talk to me about, obviously I'm a nutrition guy and I largely follow a lower carb protocol. And people kind of ask me, well, why do you do that? Isn't that bad for your performance? Isn't that bad for this? It's like, I don't care about that. All comes second, because this is the way that I eat that makes my brain feel the best. And that's what I prioritize nowadays. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. And what's funny is that that's when I was 110 pounds overweight. It's, you know, you put the cart before the horse, everything else falls in line the way that you would expect it to fall in line, which is not good. Well, what would you say number 2 is?
Believing every stupid thing you think. We live in a society of undisciplined thinkers. And you just have to turn on the news and the sky is always falling. Or if you listen to gossip at work and negative. Just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. And learning to correct and direct your mind, absolutely essential to happiness.
Do you have any tips for that? I used to use the popcorn thing. Like, I would think of thoughts are like popcorn. It just pop, 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 and it just doesn't mean that you have to like go chase that popcorn kernel, but it's just, okay, there's a thought. I mean, what are some practical tips for people with that real quick?
So one of my favorite, I have 2. One of my favorite is give your mind a name. So actually gain psychological distance from the chatter, from the noise in your head. And it comes from Stephen Hayes, who developed a kind of psychotherapy called ACT, A-C-T. And so I was interviewing him on my podcast, and I'm like, so what name would I give my mind? And I named it after my pet raccoon. When I was 16, I had a pet raccoon. I mean, literally, it was a female. I didn't know that at the time, so I named her Hermie after my favorite character in the Summer of 42 movie. And she was a troublemaker, just like my mind. She TP'd my mother's bathroom one day. That was bad. She ate all the fish out of my sister's aquarium. She'd leave raccoon poo in my shoes. That's my mind. It's a troublemaker. It'll like predict the worst possible things. And I'll get sued, I'll have a heart arrhythmia, I'll get cancer. And when my mind acts up, I metaphorically put Hermie in the cage. I'm like, I don't have to listen to you. And were you any good at talking back to your parents when you were a teenager?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I was a superstar.
Yeah.
I was really good at it. But no one had ever taught me to talk back to myself. And if you just, it's not the thoughts you have that make you suffer. Jerry Seinfeld said the brain is a sneaky organ. We all have weird, crazy, stupid, sexual, violent thoughts that nobody should ever hear. So just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. It's not the thoughts you have that make you suffer. It's the thoughts you attach to. So in your popcorn analogy, it's like, oh, I'm going to eat that. I'm going to consume that. I'm going to become that. No. You can go. The second one is, I call it kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. Whenever you feel sad, mad, nervous, or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself whether or not it's true. And I have this whole 5-step process I borrowed from my friend Byron Katie. It's so powerful. Write down the thought, identify what kind of ant it is. There are 9 different ant species, like fortune telling, mind reading, blaming, guilt beating. Identify it, and then ask yourself, is it true? Is it absolutely true? How do I feel when I have this thought? How would I feel if I didn't have the thought? Because that's where your real suffering comes from, your thoughts. And then take the original thought that bothers you. My wife never listens to me. I've had that thought. And flip it to the opposite. She does listen to me. And then ask yourself if that's true. So I love that, right? Take the opposite of the thought that's bothering you, flip it, and meditate on it.
That's beautiful. That is perfect. All right, number 3, putting you on the spot. We're moving fast.
Scrolling. Social media is a disaster. Social media, I love this phrase. If the product is free, you are the product. It's these massively valued companies are manipulating our minds for monetary gains. And I think a lot of older adults, I'll just go 30 and up, because they weren't raised in it, can sort of see what it is and let it go. It's damaging a whole generation of people. Anxiety, depression, ADHD, and addiction are at epidemic levels in older teenagers and young adults. And I think social media is a huge reason why.
I absolutely agree. I often tell people just to turn off my channel. And there's a reason that I electively go with YouTube over other social mediums, just because I feel like it's a little bit more deliberate. I feel like if it still has its vices, obviously, a little bit more deliberate, and I feel like I'm not necessarily contributing to that as much. What's interesting is I've noticed, even with myself, from a nutrition standpoint, from a lifestyle choices standpoint, if my social media game is at a place where I don't like it as far as scrolling too much or spending too much time, those dopamine hits that I'm getting from scrolling consistently and always looking for validation somewhere, they translate directly into my eating habits. They translate directly into other areas of my life. And maybe I'm just self-aware enough to realize that. But I notice if I'm seeking some kind of hit from social media, if I put the phone down, immediately I want the same hit from something else. My dopamine base is just completely thrown off as a result of that. I put the phone away for a few hours or a couple of days, and all of a sudden I'm in control in other aspects of my life. And that's just anecdotal in my experience, but man, is it very real for me.
What's happening is we're being thrilled to death. That we actually have an area in our brain called the nucleus accumbens. It's the pleasure center in the brain. It's where addiction happens in the brain. So our substantia nigra, or another area of the brain, produces dopamine. And then it goes and it works on the nucleus accumbens. So I think of them as little pleasure buttons in the brain. But if you hit it too often or too hard, it begins to wear it out. And we end up with this DDD, dopamine deficit disorder. And all of a sudden we feel flat. Why is fame potentially lethal? Because it wears out the pleasure centers. And then you see these young kids going after alcohol and promiscuity and drugs and video games. I had one young celebrity after every concert. So he just dumped all of his dopamine in the concert, and then he went and played video games for hours while he was smoking pot and getting high. And I'm like, you're just murdering your dopamine receptors.
I've never had to work harder on my happiness than I have since I gained a large YouTube following. It has never had to be such a concerted effort for me to actually work on my happiness. And it's when you start checking all these boxes, you start having, at least for myself, this existential crisis that's happening that would normally maybe happen to someone going through their midlife crisis at 50 years old, where they need to go buy the red BMW or whatever. You start, well, what else do I need? What else do I need? And if you're self-aware, that's how you look at it. But if you're not self-aware, for me, it would have just been, oh, well, this isn't enough. This isn't enough. Like, how do you get more? Do you turn to drugs? I spent a number of years when I was in the private equity world addicted to benzos. The same kind of thing. It was just like escaping one thing to get a different hit from another. And I could see, if I wasn't a focused, self-aware person today, how that could happen. And it's scary.
Well, another bad habit is being in the future with goals.
I don't know where you're going to go with this, but I'm glad you're saying this, because I'm afraid of goals for that reason.
So, I think having a direction is great, but I'll be happier when is death to happiness. It's just like ruining happiness. There's a great book I like a lot called The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. And he talks about measuring success backwards. So where were you and where you are now? And if I think of myself as small, second son in a large family, so irrelevant, not a very good student, to what I've accomplished, I feel great about myself. But if I compare myself to somebody who's won a Nobel Prize or Jeff Bezos, don't want to be him, but if I did, then I'd be miserable. So comparison kills happiness, and measuring success forward kills happiness. So, but if you measure it from behind, you're like, wow, that's so cool. And then be in the present. It's okay to have guideposts on what you want to accomplish and what you want to do. But if your happiness is there, you're unhappy.
Well, and that dovetailed nicely from social media into that one, because we're in this constant state of comparison all the time. Oh, well, that person looks better than me. That person has more money than me. Okay, well, I'm gonna work towards that goal, and that's a positive thing. No, not necessarily. Working towards a goal doesn't. And also another thing I found is with goal setting is sometimes you'll go to the nth degree to meet that goal, and that sometimes means doing very unhealthy things that aren't exactly things you would reflect upon being positive or healthy in the present.
Well, my favorite goal setting exercise is something I call the one-page miracle. On one piece of paper or one computer file, write out what you want, but do it in a very specific way. What do you want? Your relationships, in your work, in your money, in your physical, emotional, and spiritual health. What do you want? And then you ask yourself, is my behavior getting me what I want in a balanced way? Because people get burned out when it's all about work, when it's all about money, or when it's all about their health, or all about dating without rounding themselves in what we call the 4 circles of health. Got to get your biology right, your body right, got to get your mind right, your relationships right, and your deepest sense of meaning and purpose. So it's always in these 4 circles. And I've been doing this a long time. I've been a psychiatrist 40 years, and I've never been burned out. And I think it's that exercise, what do I want? And it keeps me balanced, even though, as a psychiatrist, I'm dealing with hard things a lot. But I don't believe every stupid thing I think.
No, that is powerful. That is really powerful, because I feel like burnout, I don't know what's going to be in store for the younger generation when it seems as though there's a lot less of that rounding all those corners, just because there's so much emotional stock put in things that are just superficial or beyond superficial. I mean, social media, I would almost say it's beyond superficial. It's almost it's not real. It's one thing to say, hey, I want to look a certain way. It's another thing to say, hey, I want to look like this fictional character on my social media feed. So I definitely get concerned about that. However, there's a worry right there, right? What's number 5?
Well, I often, if we talk about the 5th bad habit, it's inappropriate anxiety. So, and inappropriate anxiety can be too much or too little. Fascinating study from Stanford. They looked at 1,542 10-year-old children in 1921. And then Lewis Terman, who started this study, followed them. And then after he died, other researchers followed them for 90 years, looking at what goes with success, health, and longevity. And it wasn't happiness. And it wasn't don't worry. In fact, the don't worry, be happy people died the earliest from accidents and preventable illnesses. The people who lived the longest were conscientious. They said they were going to show up. They showed up on time, consistently, predictably. They lived the longest. So you need some anxiety, like there may be traffic on the freeway, so I'm going to leave a little bit early. Too much, obviously, is bad, but too little is not good either. I tell my patients, think of anxiety on like a speedometer on a scale of 0 to 100. I want you at about 20. And I want you predicting what could go wrong and then making plans. Like if you travel a lot, it's like I treat a lot of people who travel. They go, well, I can't eat, right? Because some airports have bad food. I'm like, well, why don't you just take food with you, right? You have access to virtually anything tomorrow, today or tomorrow with Amazon. Why don't you take stuff? And they hadn't thought ahead to manage the obstacles that come in their way.
That's a powerful way to put that. And I could be put under the microscope with what I do as being, oh, Thomas, you're preaching orthorexic tendencies by talking so much about food and health. And I think those that watched my channel for a long time know that I'm trying to give lots of tools in the toolbox and options so that people can make those concerted efforts to make good, conscientious decisions, not to give them a playbook to follow every step of the way, but something that says, hey, if you have that knowledge,
then you can make those proper choices. And you don't have to make 100% of those choices today, but maybe you now have 100 tools in your toolbox, and maybe you can choose 5 of them that you wouldn't have chosen otherwise.
But the closer to 100, the healthier you're going to be. So I'm like not a everything in moderation. I think everything in moderation is the gateway thought to hell. Because it means you're coming up with a reason why you're going to cheat.
I love that.
It's like, no. And the other thing I love saying is, I only want to love food that loves me back. That you're in a relationship with food. And why would you choose to eat something that hurts you? Drew Carey, who ended up losing a lot of weight, the famous comedian, said eating crappy food isn't a reward. It's a punishment. And so I think we have this completely messed up relationship with food in this country. That the profiteers are winning, and as a society, we're sick. We're losing. 72% of Americans are overweight. That's scandalous. 42% are obese. This is not okay. I published 3 studies that said as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. That should scare the fat off anyone. If you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors. If you're overweight, you automatically have 7 of them.
That's powerful. And yet we get scared into a corner sometimes with the pressures that are put on us. And I can speak it from a content creator perspective, where, you know, if you tell someone, hey, here's some guidelines on how to eat, it can be difficult because you are threatening a lot of their identity. You're threatening a lot of what makes them feel good, their comfort, their potential coping mechanisms. You're a serious threat to them. And I can speak from my own experience. Once again, I know I'm saying this a lot in this video, but when I share things that might be good for people to do, and it's a difficult thing for them to step into, there's a visceral response from them because I am perceived as a threat at that point in time because it's not what they want to hear. And the guttural response from so many people is, well, this guy's just an orthorexic, obsessive guy.
That's the first time I've heard that term, actually.
Orthorexic?
Orthorexic.
Oh, I hear it all the time. Because, I mean, I lost 110 pounds. Prior to that, I was anorexic. So I went from anorexic to obese. And then now, I've got a grip on things, I like to think. And so do I become obsessive? Perhaps, but
Or
I become
maybe we could call it focus.
Exactly, because I know what I'm obsessed about, and I'm very focused on what I choose, and I'm very focused on sharing it, and I'm passionate about it.
And people are going to be unhappy.
That is true.
Right? When you challenge the status quo, their status quo, they generally don't say thank you. But you didn't build a community by saying things they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
You built a community based on what you believe.
That is powerful.
And I think, wasn't Simon Sinek's people don't, there's a quote when he did the Golden Circle. They don't buy what you have, they buy what you believe. And if they believe what you believe, they're following you. And our channels aren't for everybody, right? I mean, if you're like a wine connoisseur and you love your wine, odds are you're not following me because I'm going to irritate you.
Yep.
And I'm not going to change my position on wine is poison because that makes you unhappy. I want it to make you unhappy. And I want you to change your behavior if you want to live a long time and have a healthy brain. And if you don't care, well, that's totally on you. I'll still love you and be helpful. And if you're going to do something bad, well, maybe you should do everything else right. Sort of like my NFL players.
No.
I'm like, if you're going to play, it's bad for your brain. So let's get you in a hyperbaric chamber afterwards.
Yep.
Let's make sure you're not also smoking pot because, stresses stack.
Yeah. It's the same concept with the special forces operators I work with. It's the same kind of thing. You love what you do. You're in this situation, but there's going to be steps you have to take otherwise. So, well, Doc, where can everyone find you?
So they can find us amenclinics.com, so amen like the last word in a prayer, clinics.com, or on Instagram at doc_amen or TikTok doc_amen, Amen Clinics on YouTube.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. As always, keep it locked in here. See you tomorrow.